Are there any like announcements or anything? Okay. That's fine. All right, so I am Erica and I'm from the psychology department, and I'm gonna go through a PowerPoint, hopefully in 20 minutes. I'm gonna go over a little bit because we have a lot of information. Gonna try to keep it to 20 about Vincent and what we did testing wise with him. So our objectives for today is to review any additional information that I was able to gather with Dr. Mays during our appointment together, and any important background information that came about from the parent interview. And then we're going to review the testing results. So in our testing evaluation with Vincent, we did cognitive testing and ADOS, which I'll dive deeper into in a little bit. Some parent report forms. We also got some teacher report forms, and then I'll answer or try my very best to answer any questions that you all have. So some additional background information that might be important that we gathered. During this appointment, I felt like Mom and Vincent had a really good relationship. She was really excited and very proud of him for all that he did. So that was something Dr. Mays and I really wanted to note. One thing also that we found out, again, it's a little confusing, but Mom did say, when I asked her directly about the relationship with Dad, she did say that the relationship with Vincent is good and he sees him quite often. Didn't go into details about whether or not he lives at home, but regarding seeing him, it's pretty often. Regarding the school IEP, they did say social communication is a really main concern for him at school. Mom said that he uses echolalia. It's pretty loud when he's talking. We noticed that when we were in observation with him, so we clarified with Mom if that was the case, and she said yes. And then, of course, like he makes up some of his words and repeats certain things. And we'll get into this later with the clinical observations, but we did see some rocking and spinning and hand flapping and toe walking when he walked back to the testing room. So we asked Mom if she's ever seen that, and she said the toe walking and hand flapping is something she's recently been looking for since she's met with us, and she has noticed that it's been happening pretty often. She also mentioned that when he was younger, he really liked learning about all the different logos of things and space. And he used to know all the different facts and might still know all the facts about space, and would share them with people frequently. Something I did not know. Something I did want to note, though, is that Mom talked about his strengths, which was really sweet. When she came back, she said that when I asked her like what her favorite thing was about Vincent and like what some of his strengths were, she said that he is super happy and makes her super happy, and that he's a bundle of joy and her favorite little human. So I thought that was nice that they had that nice moment there, and they like shared a really cute hug after she said that. So it was precious. I'll buzz through this real quick, but just basically these are some general clinical observations that we had. Pretty similar to, well, there were some opposites, I guess. I felt like the social story, thank you, Carrie, again, if you're listening, for helping us with that. It was really helpful with him. Mom had brought it with her and had it on her phone. I had brought a copy and we went through it real quick, and Vincent seemed to take to that. I told him that there were fun toys in the room, so he came and followed me. He came and followed me to the room pretty easily and was excited to play with the toys. As he was walking back to the room, I did notice that there was some toe walking and some hand flapping. And then throughout the session, we noticed that he did speak pretty loudly. There were some articulation difficulties. One thing that he was really interested in was the opposable toys. He liked playing with dolls that had limbs that would move. And that's kind of what he like focused on when he was playing. Again, he really liked slime, as we know from everybody. He also really enjoyed spinning in the chair with Dr. Mays and like spinning around and around and around again. And if you watch our testing video, you'll see him up close to the camera and pressing his face really close to it and dancing in front of it, which is pretty cute. It was a little distracting though. Regarding tasks, it was harder when we did cognitive testing to get him to kind of sit and want to do the structured tasks. He needed a lot of motor breaks in order to get up and move across the room. He did good when there was more like manipulatives and it was more like physical objects that he was dealing with. He really enjoyed Dr. Mays's fist bump high fives that she was giving. It just came out of nowhere. Anytime that he finished a task, she would pretend to give him a fist bump. He would give her a high five, and they'd do the opposite. And it was really cute, and he really liked it. He really did benefit from teaching and sample items as well. He also liked Skittles. We found these in our testing bag. However, with the Skittles, he only liked certain colors, and he refused to eat the green ones, I believe. Yeah, he said they didn't taste good, and he only wanted purple. So there were a lot of half-eaten bags of Skittles, but don't worry, they got eaten. So cognitive testing, what we did was the DOS. Is anybody familiar with this? It's okay if not. It's kind of a shortened version of like a cognitive functioning measure. It's similar in the way that we can get like an overall IQ score for a kiddo. The mean is going to be 100 and the standard deviation is going to be 15. Scores between 90 and 109 are considered average, and it goes off of T-scores as well. So when we look at like the different subtests within the DOS, it's going to be T-scores of 50. That means round average, and then scores between 40 and 60 is what we're looking for that average cognitive functioning. For Vincent, this is what his scores were. They were all relatively low. Some of that was due to behavior, and then some was just he didn't really appear to understand what we were trying to ask him to do. Often I would go backwards, and then he would get more confidence and he would be able to do things. One thing I did want to note is regarding like the cognitive testing, he was really good about like labeling pictures. He was really trying and like gave some good effort during this. Simply labeling the pictures, like naming vocab, was pretty good for him. He was able to do that pretty well. The comprehension and like pointing to pictures or following one-step instructions, stuff like that, was not the best for him, which is kind of what we see often with kiddos that have autism because of that like receptive language and comprehension difficulty. There was also some challenges with like his copying due to fine motor skills. However, he was able to draw a stick figure for us over and over again in one of the testing that we did. So he was kind of rigid in that behavior of like, I know how to draw a stick figure, so I'm going to continue to draw a stick figure, which it was a good stick figure. It just wasn't what I was asking him to do. So we did see some lower cognitive testing results, which I do think is pretty significant, like important to think about with Vincent, because if we're asking him to do things that he doesn't know how to do or doesn't understand what we're asking for from him, it makes sense that he's getting frustrated and upset. And then if he's getting punished for that, then we're going to see behaviors, which makes sense. I would be upset if I didn't understand what someone was saying and then they punished me for it. So this might be something that has gone undiagnosed because he has strengths in certain areas. So it was easy to kind of like, oh, well, he can do this. So that wouldn't, like, it wasn't very general. Some other measures that we gave mom to fill out why we were testing with Vincent, the Vineland. Have you guys seen this before? Okay, no, some people haven't. So just basically we're asking about his adaptive skills and his ability to do certain things like put clothes on, brush his teeth, eat, that kind of daily stuff, communicate with other people. Same thing, it's a mean of 100. His were pretty low. This is also something that we might see with somebody that has autism and or an intellectual disability. So this was important to take out. It also highlighted some of his strengths as well, like things that he is able to do, but also some things that are lacking that we wouldn't maybe expect someone that is his age to be able to do. So socialization was pretty low, communication was moderately low, and low is lower than moderately low, just so people are aware of that. I was confused about that when I first saw it. These are some things that Vincent can do, and then these are some things that he can't do yet. So some things that he's good at and has some strengths with are like saying his first and last name. His mom reported, again, this is a parent report also, that he is able to read at a second grade level or higher. He can play simple card games or board games, follow instructions involving left and right. And then some things that he isn't able to do yet are respond to what questions. I think this was brought up with different providers throughout that he struggles with some of those. Writing his first and last name from memory can be a struggle for him. Wiping up his own messes, showing happiness or sympathy for others, like that, understanding other people's emotions is a little bit of a struggle for him, and acting appropriately with new people, which we have seen, unfortunately. The next thing that we did was the BASC, which is a huge assessment where we look at just like general things and behavior concerns for a child, how they're doing with different things. Mom also filled this out. Again, this one has T-scores as well. So anything that is a 65 or higher is going to be considered significant. And then down at the bottom where you see like adaptability, social skills, leadership, anything that is 35 or below is going to be significant there. So as you can see, there were some externalizing problems that Mom reported that were significant or like borderline significant. If there's a double star there, that means that it was something that was clinically significant and important to kind of highlight. Regarding like internalizing problems, Mom didn't report any significance there, but behaviorally there was like atypicality that was borderline significant, and then withdrawal symptoms. So his withdrawal from her and other people were pretty high. And then everything regarding like social communication, adaptive living, talking with others, being able to communicate were things that were pretty significant that Mom noted as well. General comments for Mom. So on the back of the BASC, you can put some stuff down. One of the strengths that she said was that he's starting to recognize his feelings, which is really good. And will tell somebody if he's feeling a certain way, but he can't always explain why he's feeling that way. So he might tell Mom or maybe someone at school, like, I'm upset. But when they ask him like, oh, why are you feeling that way? He can't really explain that to him. Some of the things Mom noted that were concerns for her are the scratching of his face when he's angry. We did not see that during our appointment, and which is a good thing. He can be very defiant with Mom at times. Sometimes he might like push people and smile. She said when he's tired, he might get into this habit of repeating the same thing over and over again. One thing she shared with us is that he has a friend at school, I believe her name's Adeline, and he'll repeatedly ask Mom if she can come over. Can Adeline come over? Can Adeline come over? And he did that during our appointment towards the end, because she was trying to whisper and say that this was going on. And then he heard the name and he's like, oh yeah, can Adeline come over? And then he kind of like fixated on that. He also picks at his fingers and bites his nails. I don't know if this is an anxiety thing, but I did notice it during the cognitive testing. And if he has something that is in his head that has been like from the past, sometimes he's bringing that up in contexts that don't really make sense according to his mom. And then we also have the CBCL, which this is going to assess like general behavior concerns over like a broad range. Again, it's going to be T-scores of 50, standard deviation of 10. Anything that is from 65 to 69 is going to be considered borderline significant. And then anything above 70 is something really significant that's going on. Mom didn't report anything on here being really significant, which I thought was pretty interesting. She did say that he is really sweet and very smart. And, backtrack. This was from the teacher. So that's why there's nothing significant written here. The teacher reports, normally when we send out measures for teachers, what typically happens is that families are mailed like 3 different types of measures and they give them to the teachers. We did not know ahead of time what measures were given to the teachers, so they don't really match up here, which kind of made it a little difficult. But that's okay. We did our best with the information that we got. So his teachers are reporting that they don't see anything significant. And this is one of the things that his teacher reported, was that he's really sweet, very smart. He started to open up more and talk about his emotions more. So I'm wondering if that's something they've really focused on at school, and then his like IEP or the emotions and the social communication. But they are not seeing any aggressive behavior, rule-breaking behavior, or anything like that. It does make me and Dr. Mays wonder like what kind of demands are put on Vincent at school, or if like less demands are put on so that he is able to kind of be regulated while he's at school. I would have loved to see like an observation of him at school. It would have been probably helpful. The next thing is another teacher report. It's the brief. This looks at executive functioning as overall as a whole. Same kind of thing, means of 50, standard deviations, scores of 65 or above are going to be clinical elevations. The only thing that they really reported on here is a teacher said that his emotional control is something that's pretty like clinically significant, which makes sense from what we've seen of Vincent as well and lines up with some of the concerns mom's been talking about. Some of the examples that they endorsed on this measure were things like likely to overreact or have sudden outbursts or emotional explosiveness. So this teacher who filled this out, which I believe is the same teacher who filled out the teacher form of the CBCL, said that some emotional control has been kind of problematic. And then this one is the Vanderbilt. Again, a teacher filled this out regarding ADHD symptoms. The only thing that they really said was that there were some inattentive symptoms. There wasn't a lot regarding like conduct or anxiety or depression or hyperactivity from Vincent, which I find interesting because Vincent, I would say, was pretty hyperactive during our appointment. He liked to, we had a lot of space where he could climb on things and hop around and move around, which I think was helpful for him because he was able to take those motor breaks, but he was pretty active throughout our evaluation. This is the one of the autism specific measures that we gave mom. It looks and identifies like the presence and severity of certain behaviors that we typically see with someone that has autism. Mom filled that out. Anything with the double stars is going to be something that's very elevated and something that she endorsed. Social communication, again, which is like a very common theme that we're seeing with these measures, was something that was very elevated. Peer socialization was very elevated. Atypical language regarding like the echolalia, making up some words, stuff like that was very elevated. And sensory sensitivity was something that she brought up here that was pretty elevated, especially with the like not liking loud noises and the fire alarms and stuff like that. All right, so the next thing is the autism diagnostic observation schedule, which is part of our assessment, which is one of the like crux of our assessment. So we'll do these parent measures, have mom leave the room, and then we'll do this with Vincent along with the cognitive testing. We did the ADOS first, just to kind of get him engaged and like interested in like the play and everything like that. And then we did the cognitive testing last, especially because one of mom's questions is whether or not he had autism. We wanted to make sure we got this done. So based on his language and the fantastic speech report that we got, we decided that a module 2 was probably best for him. And within ADOS, there's different modules depending on the language ability of the child that we're assessing. Because Vincent was able to speak in some phrases, but he wasn't able to really combine two ideas together in a sentence, like with because and those complex sentences, we went with the module 2. So really an ADOS is looking at social communication skills, how they interact with us, how they interact with others and the toys that they're playing with, and then different behaviors that we might see throughout regarding like, is there any restrictive or repetitive behaviors that we're seeing? Is there any sensory sensitivities or sensory seeking behaviors that we're looking for? Stuff that we might see in someone that has autism. These are the different tasks that we went through. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of play, a lot of fun stuff, pretend play. There's bubbles, there's stacks, and we're trying to see how they're going to interact with us. So things that we really look for when we're doing the ADOS are kind of a lot of things that we want to make sure that we're writing down, taking notes over. One thing is facial expressions is Vincent going to show us like if he's having fun and share enjoyment with us. Does he point to things? Does he have gestures when he's talking? Like when I talk, I like to use a lot of descriptive gestures or kind of just like the conversational ones. Does Vincent do that at all? Does he offer information without me having to ask him? Does he respond to like what we call presses? Like, oh, my brother went to Florida recently. Does he ask me follow-up questions about that? Or does he kind of like continue doing what he's doing? We also look at eye contact, joint attention, which is something Bradley had talked about earlier, where with that like 3-point attention, social overtures. So like, how does he communicate with us? How does he get our attention? Does he want to interact with us? And then if there are any self-interest behaviors or any complex mannerisms. So some things we look for, like the body rocking, hand flapping, toe walking, but also like little finger posturing, which might be a little bit more difficult to see. But sometimes kids with autism might do some of that we want to look out for. There are also a bunch of codes within the ADOS, and I won't get into those specifically because that's a lot of information in the whole training that I don't feel like I am like qualified to give. And also it's just a lot of information and we don't have a lot of time for that. But just so you know, the first codes that we look at are language and communication codes. So we look at a bunch of different things that Vincent did throughout the test and see how he stands up regarding like language. So overall, he did have some echoed phrases. There were times where we would say like an instruction from him or like, okay, we'll do this one task and then you'll get the opposable figures. And he might say something like, one more task, then I get opposable fingers, or then Vincent gets opposable fingers, or figures, not fingers. He also would say some short phrases over and over again, like, come on, baby, when it wasn't really like appropriate, or more, please. His intonation during it seemed kind of flat to me and Dr. Mays, and he was speaking very loudly most of the time, more than what we would expect from a typical 6-year-old. Like I said, he did do a couple things of immediate echolalia, which we were kind of like, is he repeating us, or is he just repeating, or is he like trying to come up with a response? But it was kind of more of that repetitive echo. He kind of had some interesting idiosyncratic phrases that he would use. Sometimes before tasks, he would say like, ready, set, go. He used sorry baby and was really kind of focused on babies during this. There was a toy that we were playing with beforehand that was a baby, and that kind of like went throughout the ADOS. And then anytime I would ask him questions or say something about myself, he would kind of just respond with like the yeah. So if I was like, oh, I have a dog, his response would be yeah, and that would be it. Something that we might see with kiddos that have autism. He didn't really want to engage with me regarding conversation, or might give me infrequent responses. Offering information was kind of hard to get from him unless it was like something that was scripted. When he was playing, he did have like this script where he was like, had these people and they would either die and they might come and help them, or they'd get stuck in an elevator, and they were afraid. It was very interesting, but it was something that he was continuing to play, which makes me wonder if he like is watching that on a video or something. He would point, which was really good, and he did have eye contact for requesting. So when I was giving him a snack, we have like 2 snacks that we'll hold up. When he wanted a snack, he would point to which one he wanted and he would look at me, which was really good, and that's a good skill to have. He had some integration of like his gestures and vocalizations and like what we typically see in conversations. Sometimes he would reach and do the eye contact, or he would clap and like look at us, but there weren't really any descriptive gestures like, oh, I had to be this tall going onto a roller coaster, or I had a waffle that was this big, or something like that. Then we have the B codes, which focus on like the reciprocal social interaction. Eye contact in general for him was kind of poorly regulated. It's decreased. He typically would like look down at his toys or his legs, didn't really want to look at me. His facial expressions, like I said earlier, were kind of pretty flat. There weren't any of it towards me. There was some stuff that he found enjoyable and he would laugh, but he wasn't really looking at us. But I'm glad that he had some enjoyment. He really liked this book that we had that had like frogs flying on lily pads. He thought that was really funny. He did respond to his name with the kind of typical, I would say, Vincent, and he said, yeah, but he wouldn't turn his head or look at me. So it took a couple attempts to get him to do that. He didn't really show me anything, which kind of sad about. He didn't do any like spontaneous joint attention, although he did do a really good job when I did the joint attention with him and said, hey, look at the remote control car. So that's something that they can use in therapy sessions with him as a strength. And some additional ones, he didn't really have, like I was talking about, the social overtures. Most of the stuff when he would come up to me or Dr. Mays was like, hey, can I have slime? Or, hey, I'd like this. It was more like personal demands. It wasn't like, oh, hey, what are you doing later today or anything like that. The amount of social overtures, he really only did those to request objects or assistance if he needed help. So they were kind of lower also. Overall, the quality of his social response was pretty much, hey, I need help. Hey, I need help with this object. He would respond to direct questions sometimes, and then sometimes he would repeat us and have like that echolalia going on. They were a little inconsistent and sometimes awkward. Sometimes he would ignore me when I ask him questions or just give me like the one word yeah answer, which other people might find pretty awkward. It definitely was harder to establish rapport with him and felt a little one-sided. Play, he has a lot of strengths in play, which is awesome. He was able to play with the toys spontaneously, and then he also would use them as like agents of action. So he was able to like pretend to be the dad or pretend to be the mom, which is really cool, and have them like take care of the baby. He would be spontaneous in what he was doing with play. He easily followed me when I was like, oh, we're going to space. He was like, cool, we're going to go to space, and followed that play with me, which was awesome. He also was able to use things that wouldn't typically be represented by something like a block. He pretended that was a pie and he was okay with that. Outside the ADOS, he put slime on top of the opposable dolls and said they were zombies, which was really nice. It's a good little pretend skill play. Some of the stereotype behaviors that we saw, he frequently would rub his hands back and forth on the couch when he was sitting. One time we handed him soap and he kind of went like this a couple times and looked at it really closely, and he did the same thing with a ball too, which we were kind of like, oh, that's interesting. He did do a lot of body tensing when he was excited, hand flapping and toe walking as he was walking around the room. He was picking at his skin on his fingers, which is something mom noted as concerning for her, and if he's feeling anxious. We do have baby dolls, and one thing we look for with kids that we think might have autism is whether or not they hyper focus on the eyes. And he did flick them a little bit, not so much so I was like, okay, this is interrupting the ADOS and we need to move on, but it was more like maybe a little bit more than we would expect a different 6-year-old to do. And he loved, like I said, the opposable dolls. All he wanted to do was play with those. Anytime we put them away, he would say, okay, after this task, opposable dolls, can I have the opposable dolls? So we were like, yes, we'll use those for motivation. He was a little overactive, like I said. He kind of had difficulty remaining seated, and he wanted to move about the room pretty often. We didn't see any of the tantrums or aggression until maybe like towards the very end, but it was also after 4 hours. So I think any 6-year-old might be kind of done with us at that point. And I didn't see any anxiety, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have any. We only saw him for 4 hours. So based on the ADOS, we said that how we administered it was consistent with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. It is important to know that we were wearing masks during this, so it wasn't standardized technically, but based off our observations, we would say that he meets that diagnosis. So as we know, Vincent was kind of complicated. So these are the diagnoses that after meeting with Dr. Mays, we kind of came up with together. Autism spectrum disorder with a language impairment. We agree that there is definitely some behavior concerns there, so their therapy should be tailored in that direction. So we decided he didn't really meet full criteria for any of them, kind of like what Bradley said in his presentation. So the unspecified disruptive impulse control and conduct disorder is what we went with for now. And then there's an intellectual disability, but an unspecified type, because there were some points during the cognitive testing where we couldn't get him to sit down and like actually show us what he can do. There's a lot that we weren't able to answer with this, unfortunately. And one of the things was whether or not he had any of the other diagnoses. He didn't meet full criteria for ADHD. That could be because of the behaviors that were going on, the intellectual disability, or maybe the autism. So it would be interesting to see if he has ADHD in addition to these other diagnoses. And then Dr. Mays and I were a little concerned about him possibly having a mood disorder in the future. So something that would be great if he is continued to like follow up with us for us to like keep in mind and make sure like things are okay for him. briefly the recommendations. I know I'm way over time. Share this with the school team and collaborate on accommodations. I don't think his testing has been updated since he was like 3, so this would be good for them to have. Outpatient behavior therapy would be a really good start for his family. He meets all the criteria for like a referral to College Hill, and I have that in case anybody wants to see it. That would be what I would like Dr. Mays and I would recommend the most. ABA is pretty intensive, so that would be great if he could get into it, but also just mom being able to take him there, and if it's too much for him and the behaviors, something to consider. Completely up to mom. And then IOP would be great too, but he's not old enough yet. You have to be 8 in order to join that. So in the future, it's something to keep on the radar and to think about. And then parent training, we have that Ruby parent group, which would be awesome for mom if she could join that as well to kind of help with his more difficult behaviors. And then of course, he needs to continue his speech and occupational therapy because he needs to work on those skills. All right, any questions or comments? Yeah, and I will try my very best to answer them.
Okay, I have 2 things.
Yeah.
So I have a question first. For the cognitive testing, I know that there was like a lot of behavior that might have impacted that. How valid do you think that test was?
I think it's as valid as we were gonna get from him at this point in time. It's definitely something I would recommend being repeated in the future, but he definitely showed us some stuff that he was able to do and couldn't do. Especially like when we went lower, he was able to sit down and show us like, oh yeah, I can name this vocab. I know this, I know this, I know this. Once we were able to navigate some of those behaviors, but his attention in order to like do that for every task wasn't there. Yeah.
And considering I know that like school doesn't really have a lot of concerns about that. So
yeah.
And then the other thing you were talking about school and how they're not really seeing behavior. And I'm wondering if he seems to struggle when situations are new and there's unclear expectations. And I know that he had some trouble at the beginning of the school year. So I'm wondering if just like the structure and the schedule has kind of just like, he's okay with that. Yeah, like it's helped that. And obviously when he came here, like everything was new. And so that's probably why I so, but yeah, that's it.
No, that's a good question. And that's definitely, I wish we could interview one of his teachers to see what they're implementing. I know his IEP it's really focused on like the social communication aspects, but yeah, I'm not sure. I know mom was saying that there are times where he still refuses to go into school. So it would be interesting to see like why that is. And like I said earlier, I would be interested to see like what kind of demands they're putting on him. Because the second we were putting demands on him regarding like any of the testing, that's when we started to see some of those behaviors. So yeah, I'm not saying that they're not like taking care of him or anything like that. I'm just wondering if they're like, okay, I don't want to see a behavior. I want it to like come to school. So we're just going to do what he's going to say he's going to do today on top of like watching 20 other kids. So yeah, I don't know. Having more from the teachers would have been really, really great. Good questions.
Yes. What is the difference between the RUBI and PCIT?
So the Ruby just has parents.
Got it.
The reason we didn't recommend PCIT is because you need to have a certain like language ability to do it. And we don't think Vincent's ready for that yet. So that could be something in the future to consider, but until he's able to like through speech therapy have more of communication skills, it would be hard to do PCIT with him at this time. Yeah. Good question though.
So you said you observed him walking on his toes and flapping his hands. Is there any clinical significance of that?
Yeah, a lot of kiddos that have autism will do that. So that's one of the things that we will look for and a lot of like what they'll work on in occupational therapy. So a lot of times you'll see kiddos with autism walk on their toes, or like they have so much sensory input to regulate themselves. They might engage in hand flapping or like body tensing like this when they get excited or upset. And I think Vincent was probably either excited to see the toys or he was anxious because he was in a new spot, but he was toe walking and kind of like hand flapping all the way to the room. And we saw that throughout the assessment when he was excited. Yeah, good question.
It is one of the diagnostic criteria for autism.
Yes, that is also true. Yeah,
Not a stamp of money, but.
yeah, especially like the repetitiveness of them too.
I like the way that you conceptualize the different behavioral diagnoses, and wondered if a little bit more on the ADHD.
Yeah.
Insofar as you considered that, I think if his general conceptual ability being 44 and we're thinking about him more maybe functioning cognitively
Yeah.
around 3 or so, like, is that kind of how you guys thought through? In addition to the teachers, it doesn't sound like they had as much concern, but that would think that's kind of the way I think through it. Is that the way you guys kind of think through it on the psychology side, from like,
Yeah,
where are they functioning, and is that behavior out of kind of the norm for that
right.
developmental kind of cognitive function?
That is kind of how we were conceptualizing it, on top of like, there's a lot of overlap with ADHD and autism too. So it's like, once we start working on that stuff, would there be so much like inattention and hyperactivity? There's definitely some concerns and definitely a lot of endorsement from mom. But again, like the teacher stuff, we need both of those to kind of be like solidified in a diagnosis, and he's only 6. So it is interesting to see like how it would play out in the future. But like you said too, like intellectually, if he's functioning as a 3-year-old, then this isn't something that would be like concerning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just think it's important to think of like, what kind of attention span would you
Yeah.
necessarily expect, for and what kind of demands are they putting on him at school?
Right.
Like all those kinds of things play into that.
Yeah.
Quick logistical question. Is
Sure.
Ruby in person and here?
That is something I'm not sure about, but I have a flyer that I can look for. I think
All
it-
the psychology groups are back in person because.
I believe they are, but
Oh,
I can
thinking
definitely look at that,
logistics, yeah.
which might be hard for her because she's farther away. So. Which is why we want to talk with like everybody in social work and stuff, because we kind of kept our recommendations broader for that reason. It is. That was another reason we didn't do PCIT, because they'd have to come here. Yeah.
What does Ruby stand for?
I have no idea. As soon as I put that up there, I forgot to put it in my notes, like what the acronym was. I was like, everyone always calls it Ruby Parent Training. I can definitely look that up though and let you know.
We're looking at it.
Thank you. Do you know?
It's the research units in behavioral intervention.
So research unit behavioral intervention? Yes.
Sounds very intense.
Yeah. Yes. And it really, we really wanted to get him in regulating together also, but he doesn't meet the age criteria, which was very sad. So regulating together is like, there's a bunch of kiddos that it's research based. Dr. Schaefer does it, and they have a parent group and a kid group that go on at the same time, and they both work on regulating emotions. So they learn parent skills to help them regulate emotions, and then the kiddos talk about emotions and like how to appropriately express them without hurting people or themselves.
Where is that?
College Hill, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I heard this ever. Yeah.
But something you'll have to ask Dr. Schaefer. I think they're not doing as many groups anymore, research-based wise, which is sad. Because it's a good group.
Okay. I'm gonna put the microphone up like this because I know it was ringing a lot. It's okay. It was just kind of triggering to me, so um mm. No, I know it wasn't your fault. I don't know where to put this. Yeah, I don't mind holding the mic. Can you hear me if the mic is like that? Okay. I'm also gonna take my shoes off because I think I think better when I have shoes.
Grounding.
Yeah, I need my toes on. All right, well, my name is Ruthie and I'm an occupational therapist at Solve Vincent, and we did a 4-hour eval with PT and OT. So mine was the second portion. If you were here for our last ITT meeting, it would be kind of similar. I'll go through what we even do in an OT eval. So that will be our agenda today. We'll talk about OT's evaluation methods, the finding and key points that we saw with Vincent, and then OT's therapy recommendations. So Vincent kind of is a rare case because he actually is already in OT. So that hasn't happened before on an ITT team, but it was really awesome to work with his current OT and get some insight about what Vincent is currently working on, and then just how I could be as an OT not super repetitive in our evaluation with mom. So our first part of our occupational or eval is an occupational profile. So that means it's just a discussion with mom about everything that's going on in Vincent's life and how he is doing with being a kid. So we talk about mainly like their prioritized concerns. So I told her, I know you're already focusing on some of your concerns, but are there new concerns since the start of the school year or things that have come up since you started OT the last few weeks? We talk about his developmental history, some of those milestones, specifically related to OT, those activities of daily living that we'll dive into in great detail later on. And then we talk a lot about his emotional regulation and his attention and transitions. So from mom's voicing of her concerns right now, she said mostly she is newly concerned with him controlling his emotions, transition specifically into school with it. They have really been working on this school year and in OT, but it still is quite challenging. And even within his recent OT notes, I've seen that there were a few weeks that was going a lot better. He was requiring less coaxing to get into the school building, and recently the last couple of weeks he's needed like physical assistance to enter. Mom also said that tolerating loud noises is getting better, but it's still a concern, and definitely he's responsive to that. Hand dominance, he hasn't specifically found his hand dominance quite yet, and then his independence in a lot of his activities of daily living. So we're going to jump into those activities. Mom reported that he often finger feeds and like picks at his food, and that is most likely due to just decreased coordination of using utensils. So it's easier to finger feed, so he picks easier foods to eat. Mom also said that he is a picky eater and tends to eat the same meals and foods over and over, which could be a sensory concern. Mom said that he requires complete assist to wash his body and for dressing, bathing, and hygiene. Mom, in her words, said she thinks he's lazy. And so my view on that was maybe he doesn't know the steps to bathing, maybe it's hard for him to sequence bathing, maybe he is just used to mom helping him often, so he doesn't have to do it. Or he doesn't like it. Then the sensory component too is kind of where mine's going, like, what is the reason that he's requiring so much assistance at age 6? Mom did say for bathing specifically, though, he does have difficulty tolerating that washing of hair and the noise of the water running. So often she'll have to draw the bath and he'll be in a different room, and then he can come in when it's kind of quieter. And she uses a cup to wash, like she'll wash his hair gently and then use a cup to rinse it off because he doesn't like it on his face. Same with dressing. I was a little confused about kind of what his skills were just in our conversation, because she was saying that he is able to take off his clothes. That means doff means take off. And then she said he is able to don his underwear, but only don it over hips and buttocks. So that means literally just pulling up his pants over his hips and buttocks, because if he could don the entire underwear, he would be able to thread bilateral lower extremities too. And he is not able to do that without getting confused and needing assistance for orientation. And then the other things he requires assistance with to put on are his shirt, his pants, and his shoes. For hygiene, he also requires Max assist to brush his teeth. And he often refuses to do it on his own, but mom said, I think she reported that he likes when she does it, because it's kind of like, they're just routine before they get to go to bed, and it's a kind of like a game. And she reported that she does not think he has difficulty tolerating the actual sensation or taste of the toothpaste. They played around with some kiddo flavored toothpaste, and it hasn't like changed his assist level by any means, so that's why she thinks that the tolerance to the sensory input is okay. Continuing on, he requires occasional assist to wipe for thoroughness when he has a bowel movement, and he is incontinent at night. So I think this is getting better. School reported that they haven't had to help him in the bathroom as much, and he's independent with hand washing, but he does wear a Depends or a pull-up at night. For his play and leisure, mom reported, and some of the things that Erica said, he really likes his little figurines. He enjoyed playing with Play-Doh and on his iPad, and we did see a lot of gross motor play running around the room, and mom reported that he often likes to run and move his body. We saw and heard that he's not yet really interested in structured play, so that means like following rules for a game, or he's not really interested in sharing materials. He'll engage in play beside someone, but he likes to keep the toys most often for himself. And then that kind of leads into social participation too. So he has difficulty joining others without disrupting, and then has difficulty participating appropriately in social settings like going to the park, the grocery store, and family outings. However, mom and school have reported improvement in this area, which is exciting. And like Erica kind of said that as well. So this is games that we've seen with him recently. This is going to be an overwhelming slide, and it's meant to be. I wanted to visually show you what we kind of saw in our evaluation with Vincent. Our buddy had a very difficult time, especially the first couple hours of our evaluation. To his credit, there were 4 adults, an OTPT, our supervisor, and then his mother, and then Jamie came in later, so 3 new people. It was a really large motor room with windows and mat tables and other tables and a lot of equipment, and we have swing ropes ropes for the swings, and that was hanging down, no ropes were there. So it's kind of a stimulating environment, and even with some like we use a social story, we use rewards of Skittles, we use a schedule, we used timers, verbal cueing, all this stuff. We kind of just saw his behavior begin to escalate pretty quickly. And where he began to start running around the room, we saw a lot of yelling, spitting. He even spit on the ground a few times. We didn't see him actually scratch his face, but he did attempt to hit mom or scratch mom. And then we saw those verbal perseverations. And honestly, what we really saw is that he was so dysregulated that he couldn't even control his verbal communication or his body movements. He just kept perseverating on certain phrases, or he would hear something and we would ask him a question like, how can we help you make your body calm? And then he would get focused on a certain word. I really upset him when I turned the lights off. I thought I would, dim the environment a little bit, maybe try to calm our voices, calm the environment a little bit. And he got really fixated on that Miss Ruthie turned the lights off. And then he would say, I want Miss Ruthie, Miss Anna. And then we would come up and he said, no, I don't want Miss Ruthie, Miss Anna. I want Miss Anna. And then we didn't even know how to help him almost. So it ended up just that I left the room because Anna was working with him for the first 2 hours. And we just tried to, we kind of had to stop what we were doing and help his body calm. But poor thing, like he was almost hyperventilating. His body was so dysregulated. He didn't even know how to help his body calm. And so some of the factors that I thought were causing this dysregulation that we saw was the lack of control. We were giving him a lot of adult directed tasks and he didn't have control. Even when we gave him breaks, like, hey, you have 2 things to do and then this break, even just like or finishing one item was really hard for him. Attention seeking before adults, I think was a lot of attention that he was giving, and you look at mom and you look at another adult, or and then I mentioned the environment, and then I also love, Erica, you spoke on this too, with the cognitive test that you were doing, like the lower end stuff, he started being successful and then he kind of ran away. I saw that with some of the tasks that Anna was having him do. I think it was challenging for him, instead of having the language or the ability to communicate, like, I can't do that, he instead ran away and had a behavior. But then it was hard for us to know, could he not actually do it, or is this a behavior, or is he just trying to get away from the task? So that was something I reflected on after our evaluation a little bit more. I'm like, I wonder if it was really because he couldn't do the task and he knew he couldn't, and he didn't. He needs that have that feeling of success. And then the transitions in our sessions, we threw a lot of kiddos in their evaluation, so it was tough. So sorry, this slide is crazy. We're gonna talk a little bit more about the next one, and I have it a little better. So I put those executive skills, sorry, just go back, with kind of like that no sign over it, because, scientifically what we see, like neurologically, when a person's body is on overload or dysregulated, their limbic system in your brain, so your emotion center, and your frontal lobe, which is where your executive functioning is housed, the communication between the two is muddled. And so that's when we saw his body movements, everything kind of just over the top, getting out of whack. And so he wasn't able to attend, he wasn't able to control his emotions, he wasn't able to organize thoughts or his activities or just his body in general, because that was so, because his emotion center took over. And so I wanted to speak a little bit more about what OT's role is in emotional regulation, because I don't think I spoke about that much on my last PowerPoint, and we had a lot of questions, just like what OT sensory role is, and I know a lot of other professions talk about emotional regulation. So as an OT, we always look about how the sensory system is integrating and affecting behavior, and they can often look like this. It's really hard to know what is sensory, what is behavior, or what's maybe both. That's also why I'm here as a fellow to learn more about just sensory regulation and being an OT in general. So if I don't do a great job of explaining, please refer to my better counterpart, Jamie, with someone with more experience. But so with that communication center, our job as OTs is to always meet the sensory need or sensory threshold of a kiddo. So with a kiddo that we know more of their sensory areas, like what maybe they are sensitive to, or what they don't have discrimination of, we really focus on trying to regulate them with that sensory need to help them get into a position where they can attend, they can learn, that their executive functionings are firing, and we can then teach them the language to communicate how their body's feeling, and we give them then the calming strategies to help them not get dysregulated. But that has to happen in a regulated environment. And so I remember Dr. Weber asked the question, like, how do we make sure that we're not giving sensory tools as a out of behavior? So if a kiddo has behavior and they need to calm, how do we not just give them that as the reward? And that's a great question. Sometimes we have to use a sensory strategy to help a kiddo calm, but our goal as OTs is to use that all proactively. So first get a kiddo regulated, so then that we don't have that behavior occur, and then teach them those methods of like, oh, I get really dysregulated, or we call it different words, like I get in yellow zone or red zone after school because I must be really tired. Maybe I can go to my room and use my squishy before I yell at my mom or before I scratch my body. So that's kind of our role in emotional regulation. So then going back to his attention, his direction following, and his transitions, he definitely required some frequent redirection. He was mostly interested in his own gaming and his little toys, often running away from what we were asking him to do. He required initial instructions to be repeated, sometimes demonstration. Mom said that he is able to follow 2-step directions, 1 to 2-step directions at home. They're beginning to work on multi-steps. And I think just routine is so important for him, just for his learning and for regulation in general too. So I think at home he is doing better at following directions because he knows what to expect. And then those transitions, still school is the biggest barrier, I'd say right now, but transitioning between a preferred task and adult directed task can be really hard for him. So, for the standardized portion of the OT evaluation, we do, for like the second hour, we give a sensory processing measure that they actually fill out before they come in. And we do something called the Brunix, which is also it's called the BOT. And OTs do the fine motor portion. So his scores on the SPM, if you see at the very bottom, it says total raw score, and it was, his T-score was a 61. So, and it says some problems. So, some problems indicate from this questionnaire that he has mild to moderate difficulties in behavior or sensory functioning. So this SPM assesses children in kindergarten through 6th grade, and it covers a large range of questions to ask about their behaviors and their characteristics related to sensory processing in the areas of social participation, motor planning, vision, hearing, touch, and body awareness and balance and motion. So like vestibular and proprioceptive things too for the scientific terms. And so parents rate the questions on like a 4-point Likert scale, and they say like this never occurs, this often occurs, this frequently occurs, or this always occurs. So that could be a question like my child runs away and responds negatively, like crying when they hear a loud noise. So we see that his social participation was the definite dysfunction. In the other areas, he had typical or some problems. So now these are also some busy visual slides, but mom on this questionnaire, as we see, so mom fills out this questionnaire, and OTs do not use this as like a diagnostic standardized score by any means. It is only just to give us some more insight about what might be going on in the sensory system. It's not an end all be all. We use our observation, we use working with the child, we use the report from mom, as well as the scoring of this test. So some of the things that mom was verbally reporting to me, and some of the things that I was seeing clinically didn't necessarily line up with the way the answers matched, but that goes to say that, again, it's not an end all be all, and we use our clinical observation mostly to treat a kiddo. So in the visual, tactile, and oral processing, he scored no problems reported, but this is what we heard from mom and saw. So he was distracted in busy environments. He has difficulty tolerating different textures of clothing. We actually saw this when he was putting on his socks as well. He did not want to put his socks on, and he, doesn't like the feeling of his socks and shoes, which mom also said. And then mom said that he is reported to be a picky eater. We do know that I highlighted that in gray, the over responsive of the auditory, because this is what mom answered on the SPM. Like definitely has auditory over responsiveness, where he will often run away or respond negatively to those loud noises. And recently he has been using noise canceling headphones in the cafeteria, even like a sound blocking wall, I know, because the loud noises in the cafeteria had been so triggering for him. And then mom reported about the running water in the bathtub as well. So continuing on for those next couple sensory processing input places, the vestibular, mom said that he likes to swing and he often helps him calm. We did use a tire swing in our evaluation after Anna had completed hers, and we had some time to kind of regroup and help him breathe, and we saw that this was really regulating for him, and actually kind of helped him go into my session and be able to get some more tasks done. And he definitely was a little bit of a sensory seeker. He liked to jump off the crash cushions and bump into things and get onto the mat tables and run off of them. This is a positive. Mom reported that he is able to communicate when he is hungry and has to use the restroom, which is good, what we call interoception, so knowing what our body's feeling. But I noticed and have heard from others that he has almost that decreased awareness to the internal body cueing related to his emotions. So maybe when he's starting to get hot because he's frustrated, or when he's sad, and then relating to other people. So here is just a visual of the scores. So that really high score, or that like big jump, is his social, and then visual, hearing, touch, body awareness, balance, and then planning and praxis, so like motor planning. And then his total score was a 61, so that falls about 1 standard deviation away from the mean. And then again, this score, take with a grain of salt. It's just some knowledge of what we have. So kind of like I said, I was the second portion of this evaluation, and mom ended up leaving the room real quickly because she had to use the restroom. We were there for 4 hours, so understandable. And Courtney left the room, and it was just Anna and I who ended up stepping back in. Couldn't leave Vincent alone, obviously, and we still had some time before my supervisor Jamie came into the room, and I was helping Vincent swing and realized that he was, starting to calm and starting to talk a little bit more to us and was interested in what I had just pulled out. And I actually sat down on the mat with him for probably 6 minutes while Anna recorded on her phone because the Zoom link, we couldn't get back into the Zoom link because we had to close the computer because he was distracted. And we had an amazing 6 minutes. So I'm sorry that nobody else got to see the amazing 6 minutes that we had. But if you realize there were 2 less adults in it there, his mom was not in there. It was quiet. We sat down with him. I sat right down in front of him. Anna kind of stood to the side. And so we had learned a little bit, okay, maybe we need to change our approach a little bit. And so I wasn't able to do the standardized assessment exactly how it is called to be performed, but I did see some skilled tasks by him. And even during his good couple minutes and then during the rest of the 45, I don't want to say good, I'm sorry, that was the wrong terminology. During his regulated period where I was able to get some tasks done, I still felt, and Jamie reported this too, like we still felt like we were kind of tiptoeing on this fine line of giving him control and success, but also getting done what we needed to see, and not having him have a meltdown again, that was kind of easy for him to flip a switch. So what I did get to see fine motor wise was he was able to imitate vertical lines, horizontal lines, circle with an overlapping end, so it means like the ends were like this, and a triangle. He was unable to copy a square or a diamond, but again, this may have been related to behaviors or motivation. So I got some of the tasks done, and then as soon as another adult walked in, we went to Scribble Scrabble. So on my bot page, like I had 1 page done and then the rest is like X. So things kind of changed when another adult and his mom walked back into the room. So on the left-hand side is the actual bot page. He was able to copy a triangle, had some difficulty with the diamond, and then like a couple minutes later when I thought he was ready to maybe draw again, I drew the circle and square and had him draw boxes, and he wrote the circle and the square one and then scribbled it out because I think it wasn't good enough, and then tried the square and then crossed it out. So I don't know if this was behavior related or it wasn't exactly how mine looked, so he felt frustrated, and then so we just moved on to the other task. And then letter wise, he was able to write his name on a little Pac-Man that we made, that he was motivated by. I saw that he was also able to copy A, B, C, and P. And mom brought in a picture of his schoolwork. Vincent did not write in his C in his name, or I think he did because that's his E. And with the ABCs as well, I had the ABCs written out. He was able to sit down for a few seconds, but then started scribbling on the paper. And so I said, let's just write ABC. So I created that activity down, trying to help him be successful. And he did write A, B, C. And then later on the page, I didn't include it because it was mostly scribbles. He wrote P. So I did see that. And then this picture is also his work from school recently. So it looks like mostly doing like some copying, but not pulling those letters from memory quite yet, or writing on a line with like proper formation or spacing and line adherence. What I saw with his pencil grasp during these fine motor activities is first he actually continued to switch back and forth between his right and his left hand, like mom was saying. So doesn't have quite hand dominance, but he best wrote with his right hand. I put a V for Vincent, so this is what I saw him. He used a digital pronate grip, and he also used a 4-finger grip, or what you can call a quadrupod. So that means like all 4 fingers were on the pencil. Those are both pretty immature fine motor grasp. So digital pronate we see emerging around 2 to 3 years old, and the quadrupod we see like 3 to 4 years old emerging. And that star is where we would expect a typical 5 and 6 year old to be. So in that dynamic tripod grasp. So I would say the quadrupod is the most mature grasp that he has, but it is still significantly below. Vincent was presented with some beads. He was able to put on to like thread 2 beads, but it was after demonstration and after a hand over hand assist for one of the beads. When I use scissors with kiddos, especially with kiddos that I know have had behaviors, I'm always very hesitant. And this was an area that we needed to be hesitant on. I always ask them first, do you know what these things are? Just to see if they've used them before, and I usually place them in front of the kids so I can see how they functionally pick them up and functionally place their hands. He was unable to place his hands correctly, and he kind of started opening and closing them kind of crazy. And then when I asked for them back, was kind of like flinging them around. So immediately we terminated that task and moved on to the next one because safety is first. So occupational wise, these are the main key deficits that I really see and pulled out from my evaluation. So those ADLs of dressing, bathing, and hygiene, education, and social participation, and many of these are impacted by some of the same things. So we saw sensory processing difficulties, executive functioning, but that is like the planning, the sequencing, the organization, all those things. Emotional regulation is in executive functioning as well. Attention and motivation. Education has an additional one of graphomotor skills, which also means fine motor skills. And then for social participation, I also included like insight awareness. We just see this a lot with kiddos that sometimes it's an egocentric view. They don't realize that the world encompasses other people other than themselves. And sometimes that social participation is just impacted because it's their world. Oh, I forgot I included this. I just put this in here because I thought it was an important part about just mom and Vincent's relationship. She reported to me at the end, like, he is my world. And I don't want him to fail. And that really struck me because she's very protective of him and even noted that. And sometimes she is scared to even let him go into the community or go with other friends at school or even on field trips by himself because he doesn't have the language to communicate some of his feelings or his emotions. She's scared that they're gonna either push him aside or something's gonna happen. And so she always goes everywhere with him, but that also limits their community time and just like places they go because mom works and she's a single mother. And then when I was just asking about the independence and the activities of daily living, she said I probably do help too much and could get better at helping him be independent. And so I just said like, well, you know, like sometimes in the morning when you're going to school, you don't have time to do that. But what if about 20 minutes on a Saturday, when he needs to take a shower or bath or something, like you work on him, then really teaching him, you know, this is the first step we do, washing our hair, washing our body. And obviously OT can focus on that too, but that's not their goals right now. They're prioritized goals. And then she was just so anxious that he was going to fail in the first half of our evaluation because of his behaviors. And she kept just saying to me, she's like, I'm so sorry he's like this. I just don't know what to do. Are you still gonna refer him? And I was like, our job is to get what we can. And it's not a pass fail. We see the skills he needs. He doesn't have to sit down at a desk for us to be able to see what skills he has and what we can work on to help him. So just being encouraging to him. And she really seemed willing to participate and learn how she could change her parenting or just work with him to help him be more successful. So I don't know if those interactions or protectiveness is really impacting his independence, but just a thought to consider. So my recommendations, I did put PCIT on here, but it makes sense what Erica said, like it's at this location, he might not have the communication skills right now for to be appropriate for PCIT. Yeah, thanks. I also don't know much about it, but so continue with OT therapy services or OT services. And then I also put community services like Be Well or DVP events. I know his behaviors are challenging in community spaces and events, but I think best to be in an environment where there are professionals that are adapt to help handling kiddos that might have behavior and then support mom through that. So I think this would be a first step to really get him involved and out in the community. Thank you. Any questions? Sorry, I don't think I put that on my slide. Please.
I know with psychology, they used a social story before the evaluation. I was wondering if you think that that might have had a positive impact if you had used a social story before the OT and PT eval, just to kind of prep him.
Yeah, we actually did use a social story. We sent it to mom a couple days before. And when we got there, thank you for mentioning that. When we got there, she actually had it pulled up on her phone. And like been talking about my son and Miss Ruthie, and she, you know, so there they are. And so I think it did help him in a way prepare for what is coming, but in the social story, especially with the developmental level, you can't always tell them exactly what's happening because it's so much, it would be 80 pages long. And then another thing I noted just about his emotional regulation is I think he got a little dysregulated with some motor activities. And this is something that I think PT almost has like just a disadvantage as it's like, it's easy for me to have 3 blocks on a table and be like, Vincent, we're gonna put 3 blocks on this piece of string, where a PT has to measure, you know, their legs, their knees and their ankles, and that's laying down and it's not a closed end task. And so I give props to the PTs that help a child to sit still and get those measurements. And so I think what they have to get in an evaluation is a little bit trickier. And so because that was first and maybe he just couldn't understand what was really happening, I think that really like helped just the emotional regulation kind of rocked him. So
Oh, one other comment I just wanted to make is I appreciated you saying that he's her world, which you can see that. I think about when psychology was giving their potential diagnoses. The list is pretty long, and we'll figure out, or you all will figure out at the case conference what you want to come up with. But I think we need to be mindful of she's wanting a diagnosis. I think she probably is prepared that he might be in the realm of autism, but I don't know that she's prepared for multiple diagnoses. So we'll need to think about supporting her when that time comes.
yeah.
You did a fantastic job. I want to say that. And you did a fantastic job too. But I wanted to say one thing that I really appreciated about what you said to the mom, as a mom of a child with a disability, it's okay that you're getting your routine done, you know, like that was really wise, because I think we have a person, like parents of children with disabilities, things that typical kids learn independently, we have to, you know, teach our children. And so it's like, oh yeah, you should be working on that. I can't work on that every single day. And I think that, you know, I think that was so wise of you and so kind and compassionate. And that's the kind of provider that parents need. And I appreciate that. So anyway, that's just a comment.
Okay. Just being mindful of time, and Maria, do you have an idea like what the other presentations might take time wise?
Yes.
So I know you're filling in and we appreciate you doing that.
Anna has 20 minutes.
Okay.
And the other 2 has 15 each.
Okay. Do you feel good about that, Anna? Yeah. And then genetic counseling.
I'll probably be like
Okay. And family.
about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So we should be all right. Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Sorry.
I really do appreciate that. And look, there are gonna be days when you're not doing it a lot done, and as part of as part of the therapy goes, and it is a
Alright, so I'm Hannah and I am PT that evaluated Vincent. As Ruthie already kind of like laid down the groundwork. It was an interesting evaluation. We had good moments, we had rough moments, but we made it through. Overall, the agenda is just a little bit about like the evaluation process and like methods that we used, as well as like what we found during the evaluations, and then just kind of finishing up with our recommendations, and then questions if you guys have any. So a little bit of a general overview of how a PT evaluation typically flows. So we usually start with like subjective information. So we're asking them questions about, you know, what brings you into PT, what maybe gross motor concerns or functional mobility concerns they might have. Talking a little bit about birth history, just their general like milestones, and kind of like their home environment, where the child is spending most of their time during the day, which now right now is typically like the school environment in the summers where it can kind of get variable. And then we kind of move into objective information. So we're looking at ranges of motion, flexibility, strength, just general functional mobility, posture and sitting, standing. We can analyze their gait. We're looking at coordination tasks. And then in this unique situation for a DDBP, kind of typically in the outpatient setting, and then obviously for LEND, we try to do a standardized assessment, and then we go over kind of the discussion or results that we've gotten from our evaluation, and then we talk through recommendations and or additional referrals if needed with families. So just some subjective information from mom. So she shared that like she felt Vincent had been falling a lot lately, but that it wasn't necessarily that he was tripping over his feet. She said sometimes it seems that way and sometimes it seems random. She said overall, she didn't really have major gross motor concerns for Vincent. She does not notice per her report a lot of toe walking. She said it's been mentioned from individuals at school, but she hasn't really noticed it herself. She did share that overall she felt like his gross motor milestones were a little bit delayed, and he started walking independently at 18 months. He is currently receiving OT at our outpatient office in Mason. And that he gets speech therapy through the school. Just and kind of relevant about their home information. He doesn't really have stairs at home. But in general, he doesn't really seem to have any difficulties moving through his environment or kind of interacting with age appropriate activities. Mom also noted for me that he did spend approximately 19 days in the NICU after he was born. She said that he was on oxygen just for a little bit after he was delivered, but by the next morning they had already kind of taken him off of oxygen, and then he was in the NICU mainly because of an infection. She shared that she wasn't totally sure what the infection was, but I believe with us she mentioned it was a staph infection of some kind. And then kind of moving into some objective information that we obtained, which this slide kind of does look overwhelming, but we'll touch on kind of all the things that we looked at. So in general, first and foremost, I was not able to complete a standardized exam. So we will not be going over any kind of like standardized results or norm-referenced values from the PT evaluation, but I did gain some other objective information that is relevant for just kind of his overall functional mobility. So in general, he is within functional limits for his lower extremity range of motion, his functional strength, and just muscle tones. We didn't notice any loose or high muscle tone in his legs, especially. He did have some mild tightness in his hamstrings, especially left compared to right. And that when we were trying to do an ankle range of motion, which when we kind of notice things like toe walking, or we have had reports of toe walking, it's something that we definitely want to consider and evaluate. And so when I had him try to lay supine to do a range of motion, he was not super tolerant of that, and was more interested in kind of moving around and wiggling. But in general, I'd say he was mildly restricted, kind of bilaterally. He got about 10 degrees of dorsiflexion. But again, he was very wiggly, like could have gotten more possibly. He was also kind of fighting me a little bit. So it kind of makes it a little bit difficult to give a definitive objective number for range of motion. But also for reference, in children, we would expect them to have about 20 degrees of dorsiflexion. So regardless, we know that he does have some mild restrictions, which may or may not be related to how much time he is spending walking on his toes. In general, his posture was in functional limits. No obvious abnormalities were noted while he was sitting or standing. We'll talk a little bit about his gait analysis in a couple slides, but he did demonstrate various gait patterns throughout our evaluation. The most consistent ones were what we would call a typical gait pattern, where he's hitting that like heel to toe pattern. But he also did spend a decent amount of time also showing us a toe walking pattern as well. When we did the stairs, he was able to go up and down the stairs by himself, holding onto the rail, foot over foot, which we would expect for his age. As far as sitting and standing balance, he was within functional limits again for his age. He was not able to kind of show us any sort of single leg balance formally, but more from a functional standpoint, he was able to do things like stairs, running, and kicking a ball, where we can kind of make a functional assessment that he's able to spend some time in single leg stands, but he was not really having any sort of participation per request for single leg balance. Throughout the session, he had like a couple stumbles here and there, not any true falls, but they mainly seem to be related to like emotional responses and like speeds of trying to complete activities. So when he tried to do things faster or kind of like elope the activity, I feel like there was the higher chance of like minor stumbles here and there, where maybe it's just like he's scuffing like his toe on the floor or anything, but no true falls necessarily during the evaluation. Which I know Mom had reported she felt like she was seeing a lot more frequently. And then as far as coordination, so objectively kind of what I can observe for coordination wise, we had him do skipping. We tried to have him show us galloping, and jumping jacks are usually like some of the main ones that we hit for coordination. He was able to demonstrate skipping, and he could demonstrate like a consistent pattern of being able to kind of do the opposite arms and legs, and didn't seem to have any difficulty with that. He was unable to show us galloping. It was unclear if it was mainly just because behaviorally he didn't want to do it, or if it was because he was going to have difficulty kind of coordinating the task. When it came time to do jumping jacks, which is one of the first activities that we do for when we try to start the bot, he was getting very frustrated and like was not able to kind of just even facilitate more so like what we were trying to get out with the jumping jack. And we had tried with imitating and just in general, I believe he showed us one jumping jack, and then was reluctant to try it again. And so just in that situation, it seemed in that aspect more so that he was getting frustrated with coordinating the actual motor task and not necessarily like defiant, like not just refusing to do it. So a little bit about the standardized assessment. So ideally, I would have completed a bot to kind of give us more objective information about his gross motor skills and coordination abilities. We typically do this assessment for kiddos that are between 4 to like almost 22 years old. And we use it to just kind of again assess fine and gross motor skills. And we usually use it in populations where we are suspecting either developmental coordination disorder, general motor coordination delays, or even in high functioning ASD diagnoses. And from the PT aspect, especially, we focus on two main like motor composites within the BOT assessment. So we focus on body coordination and then strength and agility. And so within body coordination, we're looking at just kind of that general bilateral coordination and balance capabilities. And then for strength and agility, we're looking at running speed and then general strength tests as well. And it is typically a norm referenced assessment. So the observational gait scale is one thing that we were able to complete during the session. And so it's just a quick way that physical therapists are able to kind of analyze and grade the quality of ambulation that you're watching within a session. And so in general, it kind of assesses a couple main phases of gait, which is kind of highlighted in this photo as well, like the different phases that we're looking at and what their position is. So we're looking at their knee position, their foot contact, and then their foot like posture during gait, and then whether or not they're using like a wide or narrow base of support or any assistive devices while they're ambulating. And in general, the scores run from -1 to 3 throughout the exam, and that's how you're grading it. And a 22 is considered a perfect score for the lower extremity, and it's also graded like right and to left, because some kiddos, depending on diagnosis, may have different gait postures, right to left. So Vincent's OGS was given based on like the most consistent gait pattern that he showed us during the evaluation, which was that heel to toe gait pattern. So in general, he has some mild knee hyperextension while he is walking, which is what that recurvatum kind of stands for in that first box where it says mild. His initial foot contact, so what is contacting the ground first as he's walking, is that heel. And then when he is moving to take a step, he's doing that normal heel to toe kind of roll off. And then for the timing of the heel rise in general, he was what we would consider like an earlier heel rise. So he had a shorter, well, I guess not shorter, but like when he's walking, he pops up on his heel, he pops his heel off the ground like faster than what we would typically expect, which could be related to a lot of things. It could be related to just his preference for toe walking. It could be related to tightness that he's maybe developing from frequent toe walking. But it's hard to say at this moment what could be contributing to the early heel rise, but in general, it's just relatively early. And then in general, his basic support is what we consider normal. So it's kind of within that like shoulder width. And he didn't have any abnormal posturing or position of the hind foot, which we look at, which is kind of when you're looking at the back of their heel while they're in standing positions, if it's like tilted kind of inward or outward, and what that kind of does to their general foot posture. So in general, he scored a 19 out of 22 on the observational gait scale. I also did kind of analyze his toe walking gait pattern as well. And when utilizing the toe walking gait pattern, he scores a 10 out of 22. And in general, when it came to kind of just the walking, things that we noticed was the toe walking we observed, I'd say roughly like 30% of the session. And it seemed to be more so related to like certain activities or emotions that he was feeling. So I noticed it when he was dysregulated. I noticed it when he was excited about certain activities. But more so it seemed to be more in relationship with certain feelings rather than just a constant gait pattern that he was demonstrating. We also utilize a toe walking tool typically when we're completing an evaluation for idiopathic toe walking. And so what this toe walking tool is a series of questions, and they're utilized to kind of determine whether or not the toe walking that's present is idiopathic, meaning that it's like coming from a more like unrelated or like disease or condition. So like it kind of comes on randomly, or like they're not sure why they started toe walking. Or if it's maybe neurologically based, or if it could be like neuropsychiatric related, such as with an autism diagnosis. And so like specifically at Children's, we do use this as as part of every toe walking eval. And in general, so I put up the questions that I was able to get an answer from Mom, because towards the end of the evaluation, I had pulled it up just to kind of have another idea in general of like what toe walking is occurring, how often is it occurring, does it change, those kinds of things from Mom's perspective. But since we didn't go through all of the questions, and since Mom initially had kind of reported that she wasn't more so aware of the toe walking that was going on, or she hadn't noticed it, it's not a totally valid measure per se. So I wouldn't use this to like firmly make like a firm recommendation at this point, because it doesn't have all the questions answered. But in general, just from what we were able to get from her is that so he did start walking around 18 months. She wasn't sure when toe walking began, and she feels lately that it has worsened, but also commented on that like she's not sure if it's actually worsened or if it's just now she's noticing it as people are bringing it to her attention that he's toe walking. And she was not totally sure if his walking changes necessarily when he's wearing shoes or barefoot, or if it's if he's walking on different surfaces. She said it's kind of 50-50. Sometimes he does walk differently if he's barefoot versus when he has shoes, or if he's walking on carpet versus grass or tile. She said that there was no history of toe walking in the family. And that, she doesn't feel like he has any, general difficulties like keeping up with his peers. He's not currently involved in any sports, but she said that was more so because he didn't really show any interest in it. And that he hasn't obviously had any treatment for toe walking in the past. What we also kind of go through these last couple questions is just some questions that may lead us in different directions for why toe walking could be occurring. But based on how she answered the questions, we are more likely inclined to believe that the toe walking is maybe sensory related or more so like not behaviorally related, but not related to like a neurological diagnosis or of an idiopathic origin. We also had the iPad during our evaluation, and typically for kids who are 5 years old, this questionnaire auto-populates through Epic, and like they are prompted to fill it out when they come in for a PT evaluation if they're over the age of 5. And so the developmental coordination questionnaire is a caregiver questionnaire that, and we use it as a screening tool to identify coordination impairments and possibly utilize it to formally diagnose developmental coordination disorder in kiddos that are 5 to 15 years old. And in general, it assesses kind of their control during movement, their fine motor and handwriting skills, and then general coordination. And all of the questions are on a Likert scale. And so this is very overwhelming to look at, but so these are the questions that she went through and answered. But at the end, this is the more important part from it, is that based on Vincent's score and age, it is an indication, or we are potentially suspecting that he might have developmental coordination disorder. In order to formally diagnose developmental coordination disorder, it's important to note that like we need to utilize an objective measure of some kind, which ideally would have been the box scores that we could have gotten during this evaluation. But further down the line, if PT became an intervention for him, we could explore either if he has better kind of like emotional regulation or behavioral control, those kinds of things, maybe trying to standardize assessment again. Or there is a shorter standardized assessment that is called the movement assessment battery that we could potentially use as well. That is kind of like a shorter version of the BOT. And those two scores can be used when diagnosing developmental coordination disorder. And Ruthie and I also kind of had a discussion too after our evaluation, talking about whether or not from our perspectives, like did she agree that she also noticed some concerns for just in general, like Vincent's ability to kind of coordinate and move his body through space. And so, like I said, we were both kind of suspecting it, but it's easier to kind of have a formal diagnosis or plan going forward if we do have those objective measures. And it's a diagnosis and treatments that can be explored in both OT and PT. So in general, just a little bit about the behavioral and evaluation environment. Like Ruthie said, our room that we utilized for the evaluation can be overstimulating to some kiddos. I mean, there are a lot of windows, there are a lot of surfaces to get on and off, and there are mats. We try to do a bunch of fun gross motor activities like jumping, which can escalate behavior, and in our other ITT evaluations, similar things kind of occur that like with gross motor activities, we kind of heightened the environment and we were very kind of all over the place. He did, which is a common theme, kind of have overall decreased tolerance to therapist or just like adult directed activity. He was definitely a lot more interested in self-directed activities and had a tendency to kind of like elope activities if they were difficult or if he was unable to kind of complete them and he knew that ahead of time, kind of from his own perspective. And when attempting to do like the standardized test, that's like when the agitation and the dysregulation kind of first came out. And that was like the true agitation, not just like the fun, goofy, I'm gonna move away from you because I don't want to do it. It was like, it became like a very escalated kind of agitation, like he was mad, he was upset. And that all kind of came after he was like he was initially very cooperative and participating very well. But And then, like Ruthie had also kind of mentioned, he did go through kind of a period where he was perseverating on like distressing events. And in this case, a big one was when we were like out of the room, came in the room, and Ruthie had adjusted the lights in the room. And for the next probably 20 to 30 minutes, it was like a very heavy perseveration on the fact that like Ruthie had done the lights and he wanted the lights on and then he wanted them off. And then Miss Ruthie had to leave the room, and Miss Ruthie and Miss Anna had to come back into the room, but he didn't want Miss Ruthie to come back in the room. So it was kind of like a vicious kind of perseveration circle of the lights and Miss Ruthie turning the lights off. And then as far as like elopement and attention seeking behavior, there was no true like elopement during the session. He would like within the evaluation room kind of run away from tasks that he didn't want to complete or that were difficult. When we did go in the hallway to kind of try and give him like a break from just the evaluation environment, he did start to demonstrate kind of like walking down the hall, but it was not like a true like elopement. I'm running away from you to get away from here. It was like he was walking away, kind of looking back at us more for that kind of like attention, or more so just like attention in that situation. Like he wanted you guys to notice that like he was walking away and like wanted to be called back, those kinds of things. But in general, it was a lot of more so just like attention seeking behaviors after he was dysregulated. When he was in like heightened of his dysregulation period, like Ruthie had mentioned, and there was a period where it was very difficult. It was like almost hyperventilation. Like I just don't think could figure out how to tell us how to help him and also how to calm his body down. He had an instance where he kind of like went into another room and like sat on the floor while he was hyperventilating. And then anybody who kind of came in and was sitting next to him, like kind of like spurred it more so that then he got up and moved again, to kind of get away from that situation. But to end on a positive note, as always, some strengths that we notice is that obviously he's able to safely ambulate within his environments. He's able to participate in age-appropriate gross motor activities with his peers, whether that's in the school or in the community. He is strong enough to kind of move and transition from various functional positions in order to interact with different environments that he's in. So whether that be school, the park, anything like that. And that he is very good at engaging in like imaginary play. He brought his little friend to midnight, who was like a popsicle stick kind of opposable figure. And he had fun with that definitely in the beginning. But in general, recommendation wise, we shared this with Mom as well, just based on the kind of things that we observed during the evaluation. We believe that from kind of like our perspective as an associative intervention, that it would be beneficial for him to continue to follow up with OT and speech as a priority. Because like we had just mentioned in some of the strengths, like he's able to functionally ambulate by himself, like he is safe within his environment. He doesn't have like very bright shouting functional mobility concerns that need to be addressed immediately. We did share with Mom that if she notices that if toe walking is increasing, or she like now he's getting pain in his feet or in his like calves, where we can kind of notice if those kiddos are getting tight from toe walking, that it may be appropriate to kind of rethink about joining PT intervention. But at this time, Vincent seemed to have more deficits and impairments that would benefit more from direct services from OT and speech versus like exploring to PT right now. And like we had discussed kind of with Mom throughout all these evaluation presentations too, just in regards to resources and transportation, putting less on her plate at once is probably beneficial for both her and Vincent. So putting PT kind of just on the back burner for right now. But those are the main things. Does anybody have any questions?
We're gonna do genetic counts.
Okay.
And we're gonna table family to our case conference meeting.
Unless you're done in
So, hi, I'm Haley. I'm the genetic counseling student. I saw Vincent with Brad many weeks ago, but the few things to say. So the first little bit of information I went through with the family was just a family history. So I was looking at a 3-generation family history to look for things like developmental delay, intellectual disability, seizures, different genetic diagnoses, anything that could come up that could maybe give some additional information to see if there were something that was running in the family. Of note, the mom said that she has anxiety and ADHD, and Vincent does have a paternal half-brother with autism. We know that there can be many different causes of autism, some of which can be genetic. Some have genetic ties, but we don't have it like a genetic a specific gene to. But we do know that when you have relatives who have autism, you are at increased risk for having autism yourself. So looking specifically at genetic testing, I just wanted to go through some advantages and limitations to testing. Specifically, some advantages would be we could find etiology, something to get explanation for in Vincent, and the literature or guidelines do support doing genetic testing if there is an autism diagnosis in children. Some limitations are that he was born premature and did have a short NICU stay. There are different factors sometimes that these can influence and have impact on a child's development later in life. He does not have any other symptoms, and there's no specific syndrome that we are suspicious of, which can kind of decrease the likelihood of having something be found. So here's a little bit of a quick rundown of different types of genetic testing. This is not everything that can be done for someone that has autism, but there are 2 different kind of main types of testing, one of which is called this cascade testing, which is what this picture is showing. So it starts with this test that's called a microarray that's looking across your genes and looking for any missing or extra pieces. If that comes back negative, it's typically reflexed. So further testing is done to look for a specific condition called Fragile X, which is something that we will learn about later. And then there's some additional very specific conditions for boys and girls based on head size and things like that. Alternatively, there is a separate kind of testing that looks at genes specifically to look at different changes. And this is done on a panel. There's almost 3,000 genes that are done and looked at. These are 2 different types of testing. They're looking at different things, but they can each help provide some information for children. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk specifically on the psychosocial aspects that came up in the appointment. So sometimes when we're looking at testing, some people have a stronger motivation for genetic testing than other families, and that is like each family is going to be unique in that aspect. Nobody has to do genetic testing. It's something that can provide an answer, can provide additional resources sometimes for families, but it also is sometimes something that people are not interested in having done. So in this instance, there is a lot going on with Vincent. He has a lot of appointments, and so it's possible that maybe mom's focused on just going through the diagnostic process that he's going through now and focusing on the resources to help her and Vincent, and genetic testing could be like a back burner. Alternatively, it could be something that is a more higher priority. In the appointment, it was very clear to me, and these are some things that she kind of brought up in our conversation, that she is overwhelmed and needs additional support in helping Vincent and just having like the best, like how do I help him best? How do we go forward and figure all these things out? And these are other things that other people have kind of mentioned today as well. She does have some guilt in Vincent's what is going on. She a few times said, and these are some quotes that she said, she like wish she could go back in time and wish she had a reset button. As she's thinking that like, what have I done? Did I do something that could have caused this? Could I have done something different to prevent what we're seeing in Vincent? She talked about him being a COVID baby and maybe that had played an effect on something and just wish circumstances could have been different. And then she also said that she feels like a failure, which is really, she has a lot of emotional things that she's processing, which are definitely important to recognize. And we spent some time talking about just to go through and give her that space to have these conversations outside of just her and Vincent, because she does spend she is a single parent and spends the majority of her time with him. So providing that space for those conversations is really important for parents. So in conclusion, I'm standard neutral in testing, supported if the family has an interest to do genetic testing, but if they're not interested, that's okay too. And with that further information that you provided with us, Erica, about the autism diagnosis, that there's chance that we could find something, but there's certainly a chance that genetic testing could come back. Great, does anybody have questions? Sorry, I know that I ran through that pretty quickly.
I really like the way that you brought it back around to kind of what's going to be most helpful to mom, what are her priorities, and I'm glad you brought up the part about the guilt, because those statements that she made, those really struck me too, during the visit with Brad. But if she were to be interested in a case where there isn't any particular family history or physical exam findings, but she's interested, does your professional organization recommend the cascade testing over the autism ID panel? What are your what does your national organization recommend?
Yeah, so traditionally, the cascade testing, microarray and Fragile X testing is something that was more a standard procedure. And with the increase of doing exome sequencing, that panel is run on an exome background where you have additional testing, and so there is still data coming out about which one is recommended over the other. Some people will do one over the other. There's not a good consensus that. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I know our national organization doesn't have a consensus guideline. ACMG, the American College of Medical Genetics, published something. It gets outdated really fast. So the thing is, microarray, Fragile X, and the panel all look at different things. So it sort of depends on one, a microarray and Fragile X are going to have more definitive yes or no answers. You're more likely to get a variant of uncertain significance on a 3,000 gene panel. So it sort of depends on how motivated the family is to try and find any possible answer and how comfortable they are with the possibility of an uncertain result.
Other questions?
We'll start, Janetta, we'll start with you. Speak up. And next time is November 21st. 2 weeks.